It's great pleasure of us that you have joined us. So I would like to welcome all of you on behalf of Nephrology Division of RPG Life Sciences. Thank you for joining us today for the webinar on hematuria in children, a simplified approach. I'm Dr. Mangesh Balirav, Head Medical Services, RPG Life Sciences. My dear friend, it gives me immense pleasure to introduce our today's speaker, Dr. Sanjeev Gulati sir. He is a senior nephrologist at Fortis Escort, New Delhi. My dear friend, he has more than 130, more than that, scientific publications in index journals such as NEGM, Kidney Transplant, American Journal of Kidney Diseases. He has been reviewer for several journals. He has also authored more than 20 chapters in the textbook. And recently, he has authored the guideline, the chapter 5 of the Indian Society of Nephrology guideline on the COVID-19, which states about the glomerular diseases on immunosuppressant. So also I would like to welcome today's moderator, Dr. Manu Agrawal sir and Dr. Vinay Agrawal sir. Dr. Vinay Agrawal, he is Senior Consultant Pediatrics and Pediatric Endocrinologist at Max Hospital, New Delhi. We have Dr. Vinay Agrawal sir with us. He is Senior Consultant Pediatric Nephrology at Max Hospital, New Delhi. He has several publications in national and international journals on topics such as UTI, vesicoureteric reflux, and nephrotic syndrome, and kidney failure. My dear friend, today is like a feast for us, as these three senior consultant are with us. You can definitely avail this facility. You can type your question in Q&A box after the session. So before, without taking much time, I would like to Gulati sir to please take aside. Thank you.
Manu, do I have your permission of the moderators to start?
Please, sir, go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah, I would like to thank.
Just wanted to say the idea of the today's meeting was basically, as a pediatrician, this condition is not very commonly encountered, but whenever encountered, we have a very limited differential in our mind. Apart from post-streptococcal glomerulonephritis, which is generally a frank hematuria, or a frank blood, which are generally lower urinary infections. But a persistent microscopic hematuria sometimes becomes a perpetual problem for a treating pediatrician. So I was just wondering how we actually going to take this session. It's going to be very interesting, I suppose. Please.
Thank you, Manu, and I'd like to thank RPG for sponsoring this. They have, no product which we use in hematuria, so it is purely a scientific endeavor. And I'm also, it is a pleasure actually to have Dr. Vinay Agrawal, who's been my friend, philosopher, and guide, besides from the same college, from Maulana Azad Medical College. And it's a real honor to have him as moderator. And I'm sure whatever gaps I leave, he'll quickly fill in with this vast experience, in pediatric nephrology. So my talk is structured like this. We'll look at what we mean by hematuria. And as a pediatric nephrologist, we look at hematuria. Is it coming from the glomerulus or from outside the glomerulus? We look at the clinical approach, and then I'll take you to certain real life case scenarios that I've collected over these years and walk you through as to how we investigated them. We'll start off with a case. This is a 2.5-year-old boy who had fever. He was treated with amoxicillin, Combiflam, reddish discoloration, sudden onset, day 5, persisted for 3 days. Blood pressure 98/50, no puffiness, edema, family history of stones in the grandfather to make things a bit more interesting. The urine report showed many RBCs, no WBCs, protein was negative, there's some calcium oxalate crystals. So obviously this child had gross hematuria at this point of time, and we'll see what comes out of it. The possibilities at this stage, what I thought was, is it extrarenal? Possibly UTI, because the protein is negative. Hypercalciuria, there's history of stones in the father, could be renal because we haven't quantified the proteinuria. Post-streptococcal glomerulonephritis, which is again fairly common in children, or it could be acute interstitial nephritis following Combi-Flam, which again we have seen quite a few cases. And I'll open up later on in the audience for everyone to share. There are senior pediatricians here who would like to, share their experience. But starting off from the definition, so hematuria is defined as presence of more than 3 to 5 RBCs per high power field of a spun urine sediment. It could be macroscopic or gross, as we call it. When it's visible, the urine can be called as, it could be pink, it could be red, or it could be cola colored, or it could be microscopic hematuria, which requires a good urine examination. And normally about 10 to 4, 10 to 5 RBCs are excreted in the urine over a 12-hour period. But if you have, if you are able to spin the sample, you have to identify per high power feed more than 3 to 5, then you are at least dealing with microscopic hematuria. Now, which is the best sample? Now, most of us, over the years, whenever I send a sample to the lab, they always insist that it is the first morning sample, certainly. But if you're looking at hematuria, it is the second morning sample. And I'll explain to you the reasons. It has to be examined within 2 hours. And what we do is we centrifuge 10 ml of urine, 2000 RPM for 10 minutes. Remove 9.5 mils, make sure that the specific gravity is more than 1.010. Now, why do we? Because we want a fresh sample. If it's a first morning sample which has been lying on the table in the lab for a few hours, the RBCs tend to get lysed. So therefore, a second sample which is quickly transported to the lab and evaluated, or at least I remember my residency days, we used to do it in our ward lab, quickly spin it, have a look. And that is what is ideal. Now, as pediatricians, what is your role? First of all, you have to recognize and confirm the finding of hematuria, because all that is red may not be hematuria, all that glitters is not gold. Try and identify certain common etiologies, and then therefore you could select patients with potentially more significant urinary system disease that might require further expertise in either diagnosis or management. So the common things like UTI and all can be managed. That don't require a specialty referral, but yes, if it is a glomerular hematuria, stones, it definitely requires a review. Now, all that glitters is not gold, so all urine that is red may not be blood. And let's look at other causes. Well, red to orange besides hematuria could be either hemoglobinuria or myoglobinuria. Something like phenolphthalein, phenothiazine ingestion, rifampicin, we all know, causes high colored urine. Pyridium, which has been given in UTI or even following sulfasalazine. Brown urine, or sometimes parents might report as, red colored urine is seen in porphyria, but more commonly following chloroquine, primaquine, urobilinogen, and these antibiotics like furosemide, which we were using at one point of time, and now nitrofurantoin can cause discoloration of the urine. So it's very important to make sure that what the parents are telling us as hematuria is indeed hematuria by a simple microscopic examination. What do we do next? So the initial step is centrifuging the urine and to see if the red color is in the sediment or the supernatant. So if it is the sediment is red, definitely it is RBCs that are there and it is hematuria. But if the supernatant is red, then next what you do is, if you have dipsticks handy, you have the multi-sticks, and if you have them handy, you can quickly dip it in the urine. If it's negative, then it could be just due to beetroot ingestion, benzopyridine, or porphyria. If it is positive, that means that heme pigment is still there. And what could it be due to? It could be either coming from the myoglobin or hemoglobin, and yet there are no RBCs, so which means it could be myoglobinuria, and the plasma color here would be clear. Or if the plasma color is red, then it is hemoglobinuria. So this is a very simple algorithm telling you, helping you distinguish, is it hematuria, is it myoglobinuria, or hemoglobinuria, or something which is different, like beetroot-urea, benzopyridine, porphyria. So what are the methods for detecting microscopic hematuria? Urine sediment examination is the gold standard. It's time consuming, requires expertise, observer dependent also. And urine dipsticks for heme are rapid and easy to perform, highly sensitive. But look at the false positive rates of as high as 62%. And quite often when the patient, the parents walk in to your clinic with a lab report saying urine NAD, and the lab is being very honest about it. NAD stands for not adequately done. Because it's a busy lab, urine tests don't give them much revenue, and they would quickly put some dipsticks, and just sometimes the microscopy is just budgeted. And now, so let's look at false positives. So normal individuals, especially after vigorous exercise, dehydration, myoglobinuria, hemoglobinuria, some bacteria containing peroxidase, and we have seen that fairly commonly. That the lab report says positive dipsticks, and the patients come rushing in. And if you scroll down and or get another urine routine examination, there are no RBCs. So these are the possible causes. But it could also be false negative, which means that the dipstick is not showing you wherever there are RBCs, the dipstick is negative because of high concentration of ascorbic acid. And it's not uncommon nowadays because everybody is pumping vitamin C into oneself and the kids. High nitrite concentration, high urine density, that's why the pH is important, or use of formaldehyde. So therefore, the take-home message is that the urine sediment examination is the gold standard, and always use it to confirm a positive dipstick on a lab report. And a lot of labs have done away with this, a detailed urine sediment examination. They are just doing a dipstick and quickly sending it. So next we move on. How do you start your evaluation? Look at clues from the history or physical examination for a diagnosis. As a pediatric nephrologist, as I say, that we look, is the hematuria, is the red cells coming from the glomerulus or is it extraglomerular? Because extraglomerular causes are generally benign, glomerular are generally more sensitive. And more importantly, is it just or a persistent hematuria? So these are the common glomerular causes of hematuria: post-streptococcal glomerular nephritis, mesangiocapillary or membranoproliferative glomerular nephritis, inoxazoline purpura, SLE. IgA nephropathy we are picking up more and more often now in children. At one time we thought that it doesn't exist in our country, even in adults. Then we started seeing it in adult practice, and now I have a fair number in my follow-up of IgA nephropathy. Some of them quite interesting ones I'll share at the end if we have time. And placental glomerular nephritis, which is actually a very fulminant and a dangerous disease. What about non-glomerular hematuria? UTI we all know. Acute interstitial nephritis, polycystic diseases. Hypercalciuria, fairly common. Hyperuric leukosuria, Stone's disease, and Rim's tumor. I think we do see occasionally, and it's very important to quickly get on to the diagnosis because it's got a very grave prognosis. Historical clues, okay, if you have pyuria, if the child is complaining of dysuria, could be a UTI. Look for recent upper respiratory tract infection or a skin infection. Incubation period is usually about 10 to 21 days. On the contrary, if there is a syn-infectious hematuria, that means the child is having an upper respiratory tract infection and at the same time there is blood in the urine, then it's possibly IgA nephropathy. The incubation period is longer following skin infections than throat infections. Again, if there is positive family history of kidney disease, renal failure, you could have hereditary nephritis, as we call it, Alport syndrome, or polycystic kidney disease. Historical clues to look for unilateral flank pain, which may radiate to the groin, which straight away, points to urethral obstruction due to blood clot. History of spontaneous bleeding or multiple sites on anticoagulation. Another very important pointer is this. I picked this up from Up to Date, and because it's such a beautiful picture. This is an RBC cast. So what it has is the tan phosphol protein, and on that you have these red blood cells that are there, and it gives you a cast like. If the RBC casts are there, then it is a sine qua non of glomerular disease. Because that means there is proteinuria that is there. The sensitivity is about 25 to 30% only, but it's a very high specificity. Proteinuria, if there is more than 500 milligram per day, then it indicates that it's glomerular hematuria or renal as compared to extraglomerular. And hematuria of urologic or extraglomerular will not elevate the protein concentration into 100 to 203 gram, 300 milligrams per deciliter or 2 to 3 plus on a dipstick. But again, a dipstick proteinuria is always rule of the thumb is to do a quantification and do look at the concentration of proteinuria. Another important pointer could be the shape of the red blood cells. So these are, if more than 80% of the red blood cells are dysmorphic, different shapes, as you can see in this picture in acanthocytes, then it, if more than 5% of them, of these are acanthocytes, then it points to a glomerular hematuria. Sensitivity is 52 to 100%, sensitivity 98 to 100%. Again, Coca-Cola colored urine, is almost always pointing towards a glomerular hematuria, where clots, if you can get this history from the parents, that are there clots in the urine, almost always extraglomerular. The clot formation is not seen in the glomerular hematuria. So these are some of the other pointers in our history physical examination, which will help us figure out, is it a glomerular versus an extraglomerular hematuria. So if it's glomerular hematuria, then the next step is it isolated microscopic hematuria? Well, this is generally a benign disease. Periodic medical follow-up for onset of proteinuria to look for protein. If there is protein, then it requires a pediatric nephrology referral. Or if there is renal insufficiency, do a kidney function test. And if any of them is abnormal, then you need to send this child to us, because we would do a biopsy quickly. On the other hand, if there is, along with hematuria, there is proteinuria or renal insufficiency, quick blood pressure evaluation, quantitate the proteinuria, get a renal ultrasound, serum creatinine, albumin estimation, serum albumin, C3, C4. If all are normal, then just do an annual checkup. Biopsy, generally we do try and do that just to make sure, because IgA nephropathy could have normal C3, C4, normal creatinine. But and if there is non-glomerular hematuria, that is hematuria with isomorphic, similar looking RBC, is no RBC cast. If there is significant proteinuria, then we are dealing with a medical disease. Non-significant proteinuria, extraglomerular hematuria. So quickly to recapitulate, glomerular versus extraglomerular bleeding, automated red cell analyzers help to quickly distinguish between glomerular versus extraglomerular. Glomerular erythrocytes are smaller than non-glomerular erythrocytes. Glomerular erythrocytes also vary greatly in both shape and size, whereas RBCs and extraglomerular hematuria are uniform in shape and size. So these automated red blood cell analyzers, hasten the diagnosis, especially in a busy practice. And this is what we require. We are working, in 2020, we require a team approach, and the reason is not difficult to comprehend, because physicians, as we know often everything, but almost end up people feel doing nothing, in contrast to surgeons who know nothing, try and do everything. And dermatologists are the luckiest of the lot, know nothing, do nothing, yet their patients get better. And pathologists are the most knowledgeable of the lot. They know everything, they do everything, they will tell you the diagnosis, but only sometimes a day too late at autopsy. We now take a look at certain the clinical approach. So when I'm looking at a child with hematuria, I try to figure out, is it a gross hematuria? Is it asymptomatic microhematuria with proteinuria? Is it microscopic hematuria with clinical symptoms? Or it is just an asymptomatic microscopic isolated hematuria? So this is the one where we can be a bit more complacent, and we can tell this child, okay, you do some repeat samples, but in all others, especially the first two, require prompt evaluation. Now, first of all, gross hematuria, I think, the parents, a lot of them come panicking that this child is losing blood. What I tell them is that as little as 1 ml of blood in 1 liter of urine can induce a visible color change. So if you're seeing low hemoglobin with gross hematuria, almost never will it be due to the gross hematuria. You have to try and find out the cause of anemia. It may be related to the glomerular disease per se, like hemolytic uremic syndrome or something else. Prevalence is of gross hematuria 0.13%. And as I told you, red or brown urine is not always hematuria. So these are the etiologies. This is a landmark paper by Engelfinger et al. Published in Pediatrics, holds still true even today. The common causes: UTI, perineal irritation, trauma, meatal stenosis with alteration, coagulation abnormalities, urinary tract stones, which is fairly obvious in your first evaluation, but there are subtle causes which you have to depend on investigation, and 44% of them in a series. The causes could be distinguished only after detailed evaluation. 5% in recurrent gross hematuria, acute nephritis 4%, UPJ obstruction 1%, hypercalciuria, uricosuriasia fairly common. In fact, one of the most common causes after UTI, and entities like cystitis, cystica, epididymitis tumor about less than 1% each. So a fair spread, telling you again that you need to keep your eyes and ears open. We come back to this child. This child was actually a teleconsultation which I received a few days back. So ultrasound showed normal kidneys. The parents got the kidney function test, normal serum creatinine and albumin. Urine culture was sterile. There were RBCs. Protein was traced. I did a calcium creatinine ratio that was normal, 0.09. C3 was 48, which was low, and this is what pointed to the underlying diagnosis. And I told this family to come to me. Urine RBCs, there was follow-up showed that the C3 had gave them a course of antibiotics. Follow-up C3 had normalized. Urine did not show any RBCs. So this child was perhaps a post-streptococcal glomerulonephritis. I'll share with you another case. This is from my time when I was in Sanjay Gandhi PGI Lucknow. This was a 6-year-old girl who presented to us in August 1997, had edema. There was no hypertension. Lab showed urine proteinuria, RBC, serum creatinine was normal, C3C4 normal, serum albumin 3.7. This child had been referred to us with an acute nephritic syndrome, post-streptococcal glomerulonephritis. But the point to note is that C3C4 was normal. So obviously we were dealing with something else. So we followed up this girl and she continued to be normotensive, no edema, serum creatinine 0.7, proteinuria, RBCs were persisting. She came to us again with fever 4 to 5 days. I remember we had advised the father about a biopsy, but the child looked too good, and they said that why should you subject this child to such a traumatic procedure? So there was a recurrence of fever, and then the recurrence of gross hematuria. The appetite was decreased. There was nausea. The blood pressures were normal. Systemic examination unremarkable, and right under our noses on a follow-up, the serum creatinine had worsened. 4.6, blood urine nitrogen 48, urine showing 30 to 35 RBCs, protein of 2 plus, 24 hours protein 1.1 grams, which had increased to 3.8 grams. And so we quickly did a session of dialysis, did a kidney biopsy, 13 glomeruli, 8 showed fibrocellular crescents. Immunofluorescence was what clinched the diagnosis. So this girl all along had IgA nephropathy with crescents. I still remember the father. He was very regretful that he should have followed our earlier advice for a biopsy. Anyway, we pulsed her with intravenous methylprednisone, oral cyclophosphamide. Thereafter, put her on oral prednisone, which we tapered and stopped over a period of 1 year. Enalapril was added thereafter. 2.5 milligrams thereafter increased to 3.75 milligrams. And this is the serial follow-up. As you can see, the serum creatinine was 1.55, settled down to 1.17. Then slowly kind of in 2000, this is 1999, we had a nadir of 1.17. In 2000, it was 1.3. In 2002, it had increased to 1.5. December 2005, 1.9. Serum albumin is all along normal. This is the urine protein creatinine ratio. We had put this child, as you can see, on Ramipril, losartan combination along with calcium carbonate, iron, multivitamins. The proteinuria had come down, but this child now had chronic kidney disease, due to IgA nephropathy. She was 14 years old when I last saw her in December 2005, before I left and joined Delhi. So IgA nephropathy again is a silent killer and an importantly recognized cause of chronic kidney disease. Now, we all know that, and we have been trained that the commonest cause of gross hematuria or glomerular hematuria is post-strep glomerulonephritis. But there are certain pointers which will point which will help us pinpointing a non-post-streptococcal cause, and it could be an atypical presentation. We look at etiology. So there is either absence of infection prior to onset, or onset of renal symptoms coincident with infection, as we call it a SIN nephritic presentation. So throat infection with glomerulonephritis, or there is no history whatsoever of a throat infection. Absence of serologic evidence of streptococcal etiology, absence of depression or hypocomplementemia, which is there in almost all cases. So if you are seeing a normal serum complement, as you can see in the index case with gross hematuria, it is unlikely to be a post-streptococcal glomerular hematuria. If early on the clinical course you develop anuria, it is almost always never post-streptococcal glomerulonephritis or a crescentic supertransformation. Presence of nephrotic syndrome, massive proteinuria, azotemia out of proportion to the other clinical finding, high urea creatinine, very unlikely to be a simple post-strep glomerulonephritis. Again, age under 2 years or more than 12 years, because in this age, under 2 and more than 12 acute post-strep glomerulonephritis is uncommon. Prior history of renal disease, growth is faltering. It's not an acute kidney disease. It's something chronic going on. Family history of nephritis, significant systemic symptomatology is there. Skin rash is there, joint pains is there. Then we are dealing with a systemic disease like SLE. So these are simple ways to find out that are we dealing with a simple post-streptococcal glomerulonephritis or something else. Again, delay in resolution. Early on, if there is oliguria or azotemia which is persisting beyond 2 weeks, almost always require a biopsy. It's not a simple post-streptococcal nephritis. Hypertension persisting beyond 3 weeks. In most post-streptococcal glomerulonephritis, the hypertension subsides by 3 weeks. Hypocomplementemia, which persists beyond 1.5 months. Because at the time of presentation, hypocomplementemia may be there in post-strep nephritis, but if it continues to persist, then we are dealing with perhaps in this angiocapillary glomerulonephritis. Late features beyond, like persistent proteinuria and hematuria beyond 6 months, persistent proteinuria past 6 months, persistent hematuria past 12 months are again pointers to a non-post-streptococcal etiology of the nephritic syndrome. The outcome of post-streptococcal glomerulonephritis, chronic kidney disease by and large is rare, less than 1%, mortality 0 to 8, 7% due to septicemia, heart failure, hypertensive encephalopathy. But by and large, I think we rarely lose a child now. This 7% is from some of the older cities, and we've gone fairly, we can pick it up early, prompt referral and management. I take a break here. We are all in a cell phone era, and this is a question posed in a telecommunication class by a professor to the students. Is the cell phone a male or a female? And let's take a look at the answers. Well, the males thought that the cell phone was a female. Why? Because as soon as you commit to one, you end up spending half your salary on this. Next, this question was posed to the females, and as usual they came up with a smarter answer. They thought that the cell phone was a male because as soon as you commit to one, you realize that had you waited a few months longer, you would have got a better model for half the price. All right, so now we move on to asymptomatic microscopic hematuria with proteinuria. The prevalence in some of the studies from Texas showed that it is about 0.06%. But there is spontaneous resolution in about half the patients over 5 years. Renal disease directly related to the quantity of the protein being excreted. But this is if there is proteinuria along with asymptomatic hematuria, it warrants a pediatric nephrology referral because a lot of these patients would have underlying IgA nephropathy. We move on to another case. This is a 10-year-old boy who came to me with history of abdominal pain, no systemic symptoms. A urine showed 3+ of protein, RBCs protein of 2+. Labs were normal. Because of this proteinuria, we promptly did a biopsy. The biopsy showed IgA nephropathy. So microscope, next we move on to our third category, microscopic hematuria with clinical symptoms. So there is illness or a physical abnormality along with microhematuria. It could be a fever, malaise, abdominal pain, hypertension or edema. There could be symptoms which are non-urinary tract specific, like a skin rash, which could be there in hinox, Schonlein, purpura, um, arthritis, jaundice, respiratory or GI symptoms, urinary tract specific like dysuria, stranguria, frequency, enuresis. These three could be there in either a UTI or a stone. If there is edema, hypertension, then we are dealing with something probably more sinister. Again, a pediatric nephrology referral just to validate your diagnosis and quickly get on to the underlying causes. And this is the spectrum of causes of microhematuria with clinical symptoms, either acute glomerulonephritis, urinary tract infections, familial hematuria, both recurrent and progressive hereditary nephritis, Henoch-Schönlein purpura, SLE, idiopathic hypercalciuria, fairly common, or urolithiasis. We move on to our case number 4. This was a 6-year-old girl who presented to us with recurrent episodes of dysuria, hematuria. Urine RM showed RBCs, protein was traced. So again, signifying that this is an extraglomerular cause of hematuria. Surely enough, urine culture was done, which showed E. coli. We did an ultrasound, had normal sized kidneys, but I think our investigation for UTI should not stop here, because UTI, I tell everyone, is U stands for your, T stands for treatment, I stands for incomplete. And we did a DMSS scan and we were able to pick up kidney scarring. You can see a low decreased uptake. This is gray area at the upper poles, and even at the lower poles this is black, which is what the entire kidney should be. And this child had actually developed scars. She had probably previous UTIs which were missed. And we will move on to the last category, which is the most benign of the lot. This is asymptomatic microscopic hematuria. This is common in unselected populations of children, but indication for repeat testing is always there. And Dr. Kalia from US did an excellent community study which showed that it resolves in the vast majority, and at least 3 samples should be done. It will settle down in most of them. Etiology, if it persists, yes, it could be IgA nephropathy, thin basement membrane disease. It's a benign familial hematuria. Could be episodes of gross hematuria. Family history of renal failure is unusual. Hereditary nephritis, positive family history of renal failure. Often deafness is there. We call it Alport syndrome. Idiopathic hypercalciuria, idiopathic hyperuricosuriia are the other ones. In thin basement membrane disease, we quickly do a urine routine examination of the parents, and if you find microscopic hematuria, then perhaps this is a pointer towards the thin basement membrane disease. Whereas if you do an auditory evaluation or a fundus evaluation, if you find deafness, then it could be Alport's. And hypercalciuria, urine calcium creatinine ratios, uricosuriia, again, uric acid creatinine ratios. We on to the next case. This is a 9-year-old boy who came to me with history of fever. Urine showed 5 to 6 RBC, so he did have on a sponge sediment, so did have microscopic hematuria. Protein was negative. Followed up 1 year, he was asymptomatic. There was no history of deafness or renal disease. Examination was normal. So since all the evaluation was normal, we asked the father to give us a urine sample. The father had microscopic hematuria, and we did a kidney biopsy with electron microscopy, which is where we evaluated. You can make a final diagnosis of thin basement membrane disease. It's a benign entity as compared, and the importance is to separate it from Alport syndrome. That's why it's important to biopsies in this. So unexplained hematuria, the common causes could be an IgA nephropathy, thin basement membrane disease, hypercalciuria, or hyperuricosuriia. That's why if it is persisting on a repeat examination, do get a pediatric nephrology review. And this is the logarithmic approach to hematuria. Is it gross hematuria? History and physical examination, do a urine culture, CBC, serum creatinine, C3, renal ultrasound, urine calcium creatinine ratio, and nephrology review. If it is microscopic hematuria with clinical symptoms, symptom-specific evaluation, again a pediatric nephrology review is there. If microscopic hematuria is there, asymptomatic, isolated, uh, mm, if there is isolated hematuria, then you can follow these children up, repeat urine examinations over 2 to 3 weeks, do a urine culture. If it's persisting over 1 year, then do a calcium creatinine ratio, do a familial uric examination. If there is proteinuria, if it is more than 4 milligram per square meter or a urine PC ratio 4.2, then hematuria and proteinuria is there, pediatric nephrology review. If the dipstick protein is less than 4 milligram, if there is microscopic hematuria, these children can be followed up, and if they develop proteinuria, renal dysfunction, that's the time then we do a biopsy. So I conclude by saying that if a child comes or the parents walk in to you saying that this child is hematuria, do a confirmatory urine examination by a urine microscopy. Confirm that it is hematuria. The common causes that you need to rule out are inflammation or infection of the bladder, cystitis as we call it, kidney stones or glomerulus diseases, and a pediatric nephrology referral is warranted in all these patients. And if any of you want further greater details, you can refer to my chapter, which I've just recently updated in Medscape. It is available for free. Because of constraints of time, we'll open this presentation for discussion, and also before that expert comments by Dr. Vinay Agarwal. This is SGPGI, where I need to acknowledge where I was working earlier. I have picked up most of these cases other than the first ones on there. Thank you. Over to you, Dr. Vinay and Dr. Manu.
Sir, that was an excellent presentation. I think made pretty simple. That we actually start thinking about hematuria. As a pediatrician, you get confused, so much confused. Beyond 1 or 2 conditions, you cannot think many a times. I was going through the thing, and then Alport and thin basement membrane disease actually came as a surprise, because that was never even considered in our thinking as a treating pediatrician. But most of the times, barring post-streptococcal, I think you require the help of a nephrologist, or if lower urinary tract problems are considered, then probably a urologist many a times. I'll just take the question answer section. This is a question put by Santosh. When should isolated microscopic hematuria be labeled as persistent and to warrant further investigations?
So if you have 3 samples over a period of 3 to 4 weeks, showing each and every sample is showing microscopic hematuria, then it should be labeled as persistent microscopic hematuria. And at that point of time, we should subject this child to a detailed evaluation.
A detailed evaluation or regular follow-up again?
Yeah, I think so. Look at, at the first time presentation, if there is no proteinuria, I would just reassure the family and tell them that you come to me with the second urine test or even a third urine test. If at the third examination there is the RBCs are persisting, then I'd go ahead with a urine calcium creatinine ratio, urine protein creatinine ratio, ultrasound, and that's the time then we start investigating in greater detail. But if there is proteinuria in the first visit, then obviously then we cannot wait. Then it's as I said, the second category is the microscopic hematuria with proteinuria that signifies a glomerular disease.
So since post-streptococcal glomerulonephritis is generally a immunologically mediated illness after the infection,
yeah,
what is the role of antibiotics in post-streptococcal glomerulonephritis?
Yeah, so this is a very good, very practical question, and it is believed that if a child comes to you with post-streptococcal glomerulonephritis, it is mandatory to give him a 10-day course of antibiotics, because the persistent antigenemia can trigger the immunological cascade and worsen the glomerular disease. So make sure a complete 10-day course of antibiotics is given.
Okay, and still the old penicillin is good enough, or we give some other antibiotic nowadays.
Actually, it's hard to get penicillin. Whenever I remember we prescribed penicillin a few years back, and the family went around in circles. So I think we are commonly using amoxicillin or augmentin as the first line drug in these patients.
And in IgA nephropathy, once diagnosed, the person is generally kept in follow-up indefinitely, or there is some time?
Yeah, so IgA nephropathy is a silent killer, and in adults now it is the commonest glomerular disease we are seeing. And the experience from Japan is that with the best studies in IgA nephropathy are still from Japan, where they have excellent school health examination, and the mandatory urine testing is done in all children at school entry and then every 5 years. And they have been able to pick up IgA nephropathy fairly early and intervene, and a lot of times prevent progression to chronic kidney disease. But it's a silent progression. So there is a rule of 10. At 10 years, 10% will develop chronic kidney disease. At 20 years, 20% will develop chronic kidney disease. At 30 years, 30% will develop chronic kidney disease. So, there are recent studies now available. There were anecdotal case series reported from Japan. They said that you should be giving prednisone, and extensively in the pediatric literature, and now we have studies available in adult literature also telling us that steroids should be used early in IgA nephropathy before the scarring sets in.
Okay. Since we see nephrotic syndrome pretty commonly in
Right,
pediatric practice, and is to some extent hematuria is acceptable in initial stages, or hematuria in any particular stage has to be looked with suspicion?
Yeah, I think that's a very good question, because 4% of all nephrotic syndrome from our series which we published in Sanjay Gandhi PGI had gross hematuria, and 22% had microhematuria. This I'm telling you about minimal chain disease. Okay, so if there is if a child comes to with nephrotic range proteinuria and has microscopic hematuria, I don't bother too much about it. But if he has microscopic hematuria in combination with hypertension, then this is a child who I think warrants a kidney biopsy, because it could be a non-minimal chain disease. Gross hematuria also we have seen about 4%, and if it's no hypertension and the complement levels are normal, then I think you just go ahead with prednisone therapy. I don't know, is Dr. Vinay around finally or with us for his comments?
So we have so many participants. Is any other question coming to somebody's mind, or the session was so clear that there are no doubts left? So with that, I think there are no further questions coming. Dr. Gulati, I'm really thankful to you for heeding to my requests again and again, and you have been repeatedly being gracious enough to come. I think you've been coming to this forum at least 3 or 4 times in the last 3-4 months, and we'll be looking forward for more of such sessions from you in future also. And thank you for all your support. And I think good night to everyone. And thank you RPGs for organizing such a good session. Thanks,
you so Manu. Much. It is always a great honor and great pleasure to interact with the South Delhi IAP. I think one of the most vibrant forums and a very academic forum. And I keep on following your posts silently and revising my pediatrics, very academic group. Thank you once again, and thank you RPG for
yes, sir.
Sponsoring this session, which has got nothing to do with the products that RPG makes.
Thank you, sir. Thank you on behalf of nephrology. I would like to thank Gulati sir, Dr. Vinay sir, and Dr. Manu sir.
Thank you,
for giving us this opportunity. The session link, this video would be available on YouTube once Dr. Gulati sir approves it after the editing. So you can also share the links, and you can refer the video on YouTube very soon on RPG channel.
Yeah, that will be a good idea, because some of the people wanted a late session, so we could, at least if you can put it, send me the link, we could circulate it on the Dr. Manu.
Last time there was a problem in accessing the link, I think.
Okay.
So
this would be available now purely on YouTube channel. We have our dedicated YouTube, so same link can be shared with anyone.
Okay, wonderful.
It will be available there.
Thanks, Mangesh. Thanks a lot.
Yes, sir.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
Okay, good
Bye-bye.
night. Good night.
Good night,
Bye.
everyone.
Bye. Bye.
Bye-bye.